evening, everyone. The patient, Dev, 10-year-old boy, he studies in fourth class and resident of Faridabad, Haryana, presented with chief complaints of difficulty in walking because of he cannot put his heel on the ground for the past 2.5 years. It was started in the left foot, and after 3 months, the similar complaint started in the right foot. The the patient the patient does not have any complaint of pain or any other any swelling. There is no history of trauma, no history of fever.
Now, what's the progression been?
The
From the time it
deformity
started, what's been happening?
the deformity progresses over time to the present status. Firstly, the patient could walk with support. Now the patient is unable to walk without support. He cannot squat, but able to sit cross-legged. There is no
So, from the sitting position, have you asked him if he's able to get up?
the parents gave history that he needs support to get up from the sitting on the ground position, but it was not present earlier than 2.5 years.
So, from the history, from the brief history that you have have you got some clue as to what could be the diagnosis?
The patient has acquired deformity of the bilateral foot, which is progressive. Bilateral equinus deformity.
Deformity is fine. The diagnosis is the deformity is due to what diagnosis likely?
Most likely due to muscular pathology, myopathies, some myopathy, because there is no history of sensation loss. And
What if I say that this could be cerebral palsy? How will you contradict me?
When the patient he was born out of a normal vaginal delivery, and he does not have any symptom.
So, in one sentence, how can you say, how will you differentiate between cerebral palsy and the diagnosis that you're giving us?
The patient does not have spasticity, and he does not have any developmental.
That is a non-progressive entity.
Non-progressive.
Whereas this has been progressing, right? That's the fundamental difference between cerebral palsy and deformity due to some other cause.
On examination, the gait, he walks on toes. He is toe walking with swing and stance face normal. The patient cannot walk without support for a long. He can walk for a little distance.
Just to correct you, I think you said he's walking on his toes, so there cannot be a stance phase. There is on his toes, so the gait is abnormal.
Can you show us the way he walks? Just make him walk. Pick up the things. Just make him walk. Why is he walking so cautiously? Ask him to walk normally. He walks pretty well. Okay, bring him back. All right. Okay, you make him. Can he squat? Ask him to sit down. No, sit down on the floor and then get up.
Each one.
No. Okay, okay, all right. Okay, let him sit down. Yeah. Okay, leave him now and ask him to get up now. What are we trying to assess? See that?
So we are trying to assess the proximal muscle weakness.
No. What is he doing? He is just riding on his body. What are we testing?
Proximal muscle weakness.
What is that? What is
Gover's sign.
Gover's sign? Is it positive in this patient or is it negative?
Sir, it's negative.
Negative.
What happens in a typical Gower sign?
Either the patient takes support of his lower limbs, he climbs over his,
Out of the lower limb or
Say
the
that
upper limb?
again.
but then he uses his he uses his legs to climb up using upper limbs.
So, if you have watched him, he was using the support to rise till a particular level. And then it is not a full-blown Gower sign positive because he is not coming on to his thighs. Otherwise, they take the head from the floor and then move to the thigh and then rise up. And that's not a, in its true sense, probably we can say that it is not positive. But it does reflect that he is needing support to get off the ground. Okay? All right. And then there was a question asked whether how will you differentiate, how will you comment that this is not a due to cerebral palsy?
So,
Did he answer that question?
He
Okay.
answered from the history. So history we
No,
told
but
you.
physical demonstration.
Now physical examination.
How can you decipher that this is likely to be cerebral palsy and this is not likely to be cerebral palsy?
this is not likely cerebral palsy because the patient there is no spasticity.
There is no
Spasticity.
spasticity. How did you look for it?
So,
You put him on the couch. Put him on the couch. Okay, you mean to say the muscle tone is normal? Muscle tone is normal. And did you try to do some deep tendon reflexive assessment?
These were normal.
They are normal. Any other way to say that this limb is the deformity is not due to cerebral palsy?
So it is equinus. Generally in cerebral palsy the deformity does not progress, but in this
It
case
does not progress. How will you know whether it is progressing or not? Because you are seeing it for the first time today. And just to believe the parents, every parent is concerned about the child. And as the child grows, they always have an impression that the deformity is also increasing.
so
See, remember, by and large, spastic equinus due to cerebral palsy tends to correct under sustained pressure. If you apply sustained pressure, you see, initially if you try to correct, it may not correct. But under sustained pressure, as the muscle relaxes, you are able to bring it to neutral or beyond that. But if you try in this patient, it does not budge. It does not budge at all. So it is unlikely to be the case of cerebral palsy. Alright? Did you try to decipher whether the cause, what is the cause of this equinus?
I have two causes in my life. One is he has growth spurt.
Growth spurt. What is the cause of the equinus deformity?
Posterior muscle weakness.
Which muscle? Weakness?
Tightening.
Posterior muscle doesn't mean anything, right? We talk about tibialis posterior. That is posterior muscle.
Which muscle?
tender gastrocnemius and soleus.
Gastrosoleus. Gastrosoleus. So, were you able to decipher whether the problem is because of this gastrocnemius or the soleus or both?
So,
How?
so this is test called silver small test.
Be a little louder. And can you demonstrate it for the audience?
The silver shield test. You can go on the other side, try to go on the other side, and manipulate the limb which has not been operated. Because they are identical. Both of them are identical, manipulate the limb which is not operated.
So in full extension, in extension of the knee, the equinus at the ankle is around.
Be loud. You are not.
In extension of the in extension at the knee, the equinus at the ankle is around 60 degree now, and on flexing the knee. On flexing the knee, the equinus decreases by around 20 degrees. So there is
There is some correction occurring. So if correction is occurring, then what does it tell you?
gastrocnemius.
Gastrocnemius is, but it is not getting corrected fully.
So there is soleus.
Soleus also. Sir, please.
I think we are lucky to have foot and ankle surgeon with us. You want to just
Show the findings there, Anush. Can you show them and how to do it?
So I think the most important thing is when you're examining the patient with any ankle deformity, you have to tell what are the deformities in the patient. Can you tell me what are the deformities?
So there is equinus at the ankle, equinus at the hind foot, and varus, hind foot varus, and cavus, and extension at the metatarsal.
Extension of the metatarsal. Does he have any deformity in the toes? That means, what deformity do you see in any patient who has an equinocaval varus? What kind of deformity can you see in the toes?
The hammer tip.
So it would be clawed deformity. I mean, if you're talking about a paralytic limb or anything within with the neuromuscular imbalance, you would see a claw toe, which involves hyperextension at the metatarsal phalangeal joint and IP joint flexion at both proximal and the distal. So for examining any deformity in the foot and ankle, you have to examine the patient in the standing position. We cannot decipher whether the patient has a hind foot varus when a patient is lying down. So always see the patient when he's walking, see him from all four sides. Okay, the virus can only be seen when the patient is standing, and you can see it from behind. So can you just make the patient stand once? ऊपर खड़े हो पाओगे? So what can you see on the right hand side? Do you think there is a virus? Okay. बेटा तुम ऐसे खड़े हो जाओगे, उधर की तरफ देखते हुए, पूरा टर्न करते हुए. Okay, so when you're looking at the deformity, you have to imagine what is the long axis of the Achilles and the gastrocnemius, and you have to look at the long axis of the heel. So heel varus can only be is best seen from the posterior side when you're looking it from the back. And if I look at it, it does not appear to be a significant heel varus. But having said that, the fact is that the patient is actually standing in an equinus position. So equinus actually would lead to a little bit amount of heel varus. So I would not call it a significant heel varus. It is always done with the patient standing and the heel is on the ground. So I don't think there is a significant amount of varus in the heel, and this is how you actually look for it. But yes, as you mentioned, that there is a slight cavus, and if you look at the toes, at this point of time, I don't see any claw toe. So maybe you can make the patient lie down and then see it again. Better like, great job. So you did mention that there is an equinus deformity or an equinus contracture. So why does the equinus develop?
Tendinochilus contraction.
So rather than saying that it is due to the contracture of gastrocnemius, it is due to a muscle imbalance between the muscles in the front of the dorsum, which are the extensors, and the muscles at the back. What are the muscles in the front that you're looking for? Which weakness can cause an equinus contraction?
So tibialis anterior, extensor abducens, extensor anterior.
Okay. How is the power in these muscles? Can you assess them?
We ask the patient the function of tibialis anterioris, dorsiflexion and inversion. So we'll ask the patient to invert and dorsiflex.
Abdus, you have to be a little louder.
The patient is able to dorsiflex and invert the foot.
He is everting right now, so he's not inverting. Very good. Okay, another thing is that inversion, when it happens, it is dorsiflexion and inversion. Now we look at it, tibialis anterior is at a disadvantage because the hind foot is in equinus. So you're not bringing the patient to the neutral, so that is why it is difficult to feel whether the tibialis anterior is contracting or it is the tibialis posterior. But you know that he can invert, so tibialis posterior is strong. Tibialis anterior, so whenever you're testing the muscles, always feel for the contraction also. Okay, whenever the patient is lifting it up, you feel where is the tibialis anterior. So it is just lateral to the border of anterior border of the shin. So you feel for it and then you see it. Second thing is that, as we know, that when you are examining the patient, it is currently in a full extension. So the knee is in full extension and the ankle is in equinus. You cannot assess tibialis anterior when the ankle is in equinus because you need the ankle to be slightly in the neutral position ideally so that the ankle can go into dorsiflexion. So one way of assessing tibialis anterior in this case would be to flex the knee joint so that at least you can take care of the contracture of the gastrocnemius. You saw that the equinus reduced significantly, right? So the way you can assess it is by flexing the knee joint. Okay? बेटा इसको जरा मोड़ो अभी इसको ऊपर करो पंजे को ऊपर करो ढीला छोड़ो अब ऊपर करो so you can see ढीला छोड़ो अभी ऊपर करो so this is where the tibialis anterior is and I can feel contraction over here. And if you look at the extensor hallucis longus, there is a significant amount of contraction as well. Okay. Any problem with the sensory aspect? Okay, can you just show all the muscles, how we can test for contraction of all the muscles around the ankle? Sir, if you want to, please interrupt. So you've already shown tibialis anterior and tibialis posterior. What are the other muscles that you have to check for?
Inverters and inverters.
Okay, can you just demonstrate?
We'll ask the patient to invert the foot. The patient is able to move.
Well, sir, let's show how to test for the muscle power in one of the last cases. Were you there that time or no? So you can just turn the patient this side and then you can initially just ask the patient to touch your finger and then you can see with the resistance with your finger how much is the power. You have seen how girls have shown. Show you.
We'll ask the patient to revert and he is able to go against the gravity. We'll apply the resistance.
उस वाले को मेन पे कर दो जो वो वाला है ना
Patient can do against gravity.
Against gravity, against resistance, everything was shown. Where should be your other hand and how you should see?
So we'll see another aspect of the patient.
To tell us what you are testing, I'll show you. So that everyone can see on the screen how this began.
I'm testing inverters of the foot against resistance.
So we've shown this in the morning.
Yes.
Everybody should try to practice this. See how confusing it can be. This we in the morning we showed you four muscles. Coronary longus, brevis, tibialis anterior, tibialis posterior, and EHR and extensor distal. And exactly the similar case, similar pattern we followed. We're going from upper motor neuron problem to low motor neuron problem. We're ruling out anterior horn cell nerves, and you're making diagnosis that there is no sensory deficit. There's proximal muscle weakness. You have demonstrated with the Gauss sign. Then we want you to test some muscles because we already told it is an imbalance of muscle, gravity, and contracture, which is all contributing for equine deformity. And then we have to say which bit is being contributed by gastrocnemius or soleus or combined. This is what question will be asked. There is no secret. Every exam this will be asked. Okay, so you should be able to very crisp with your presentation that these are the muscles involved from proximal to distal. And then the examination will focus on one clear deformity here is the equinus deformity. Yeah? Diagnosis is made pre-history, right from the prefrontal lobe where the motor neuron is, upper motor, low motor, and we have got now it is a muscular problem. The previous problem was neurological problem, which we saw at Charcot-Marie. This is a muscular problem. We know why it is. Then these are signs you need to practice, every one of you. How to individually test these muscles. Yeah, 4 muscles at least you should, all of you test, because we have demonstrated clearly in the morning how to test tibialis anterior, how to test tibialis posterior. Practice, go tonight on each other's or whichever available to you. You should be by tomorrow very fluent to tell, okay, tibialis anterior, tibialis posterior, these are peroneal, how I test, this is EHL, this is EDL, gravity excluded, and then against resistance. We're not going to repeat that again and again because it will be your waste of time. Yeah. But the sequence is same. And then you say, this is classically in this case, will be asked about what is contributing for this equinus. And because why that is important? Why do we talking about whether it's gastrocnemius, soleus, how does it matter whether it's combined?
Because management, surgical management depends on.
Okay, what would be the different management? if it is combined for that. And I think that is what is important for this case. Every case is exactly same. Your brief history, examination from top to bottom, your diagnosis, why you're saying it is a muscular problem with this, and which muscle are affected, and then 1 or 2 tests we will ask. That's all. And that's been demonstrated today.
Sir.
So, I think it's been agreed upon that it's a myopathy that we are dealing with. Something, I don't, I think the calf hypertrophy has been picked up, because there is a calf hypertrophy more so on one side. And this is what is known as the pseudo-hypertrophic myopathy. Now, Duchenne type of myopathy, and the other one is the Becker type. These are the two important types of. Because after seeing this case, because I wanted to educate myself, these are not routine cases coming to orthopedics. So I just referred back to Campbell, and that is what I am recommending all of you to do that for this particular patient. And I had some very interesting lessons from that. One of the lessons was that these patients require something which is quite commonly being done now, known as genetic studies. Because the profile of genetic studies which they do today, they can pick up what type of a dystrophy he is suffering from. To the tune of the fact that the muscle biopsies which were recommended previously have taken a backstage. But still, if you want to do a muscle biopsy, then there is an incision in the calf here. I admit that this is against the recommendations. It is mentioned there that the muscle which is most involved should not be biopsied, because that will not give you the true representation, because it has already undergone a lot of degenerative changes or fibrosis. The recommended muscle for biopsy is the vastus lateralis or the rectus abdominis, because these muscles, they show you the initial changes. So this is something which a postgraduate, I think, can imbibe, because I have imbibed this at a very late stage. But something which has come to my knowledge, I think it's my duty to inform the House today that this is what happened. And to my misfortune, I had clearly given instructions to the resident who was handling this case, a rectus abdominis biopsy. Now this biopsy has to be done not by us, but by a general surgeon. The general surgeon chose to do a biopsy in the region of involvement. This is how things went wrong. Okay, and it's very important to be honest, to admit if something has been done wrong. This is another lesson which we are learning today. So the biopsy should be done from that area. Coming to the treatment, I have also come to realize that it is recommended that sooner or later, these patients are going to develop more muscle weakness, and ultimately they'll become non-walkers. They may shift to a wheelchair life. And to my surprise, there is a recommendation that the tendo Achilles should not be touched. They're walking, they're able to walk on tiptoes, such patients who have developed, who are, once we confirm that it is a muscular dystrophy of the type that we are thinking, then tendo Achilles should not be touched, because it is pseudo-hypertrophy. The muscle is weak, but hypertrophic. So it's a erroneous situation. We feel that the muscle is strong. It is not the strong muscle, it is the contracted muscle because of the fibrosis. If you release it, there is a risk of a reverse deformity,
a calcaneus deformity developing, which will be much more disabling to the child. So I think whatever we do should be with thorough investigation in this patient. We are holding everything on this patient. We are still studying. And the muscle biopsy which has been performed is of no use. We'll have to fall back on the genetic studies, and if required, a biopsy from this time, I think vastus lateralis, which will be under our control, orthopedic control, we will like to do it.
We'll request you to continue this on Thursday,
I'm
5
sharing
p.m.
this
sir.
information, and I sincerely recommend, please go and read just Campbell's Orthopedics on the chapter of the section of muscular dystrophy, Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Thank you.
Sir, please continue this in Conceptual Connect at 5 p.m. on Thursday, sir. Professor Dal.
I'll just add two more points on it. It's absolutely right what Dr. Dhal has just told. And in fact, these children should be recognized much earlier. It is said that by 5 to 6 years of age, the earliest you can diagnose them when the parents notice heel off the ground when they are walking. And that's the time you pick them up. And absolutely right, that is for diagnosis and for clinical diagnosis, and absolutely right that no release should ever be done in these patients. Rather, you make them wheelchair bound much earlier. Now, if they are typical Duchenne, of course, in that condition, they by 10, 12, 20, but 15 years, they start becoming wheelchair bound, and then after some of them start slumping right in the wheelchair itself. So most of them go away. Most of them, the mortality is high because 20 years, by 20, 25 years, they have a respiratory distress. Some of them, of course, genetic study is very important. And those who have been slumping, either the braces have been given, which has been most failure. And I still remember that people used to do spinal fixation for keeping them upright, putting big rods, Harrington rods during those times. But nowadays, I think most of them they're wanting to put some brace for them and put them in wheelchair. So that is what is the usual natural history for these patients.
What's the one blood investigation you want to do here that can confirm to some extent?
Creatinine kinase.
CPK. And what other system can be affected in this condition?
There can be cardiomyopathies.
Okay, so if you're subjecting him to surgery, it is very essential to evaluate that and also the lung functions.
CPK level is very high.
Right.
About 4,000 or something. It is mentioned that it can be 100 times higher. Very high.
See, there are a couple of conditions in which they are thinking that gene therapy is going to be the future, and one of them is this Duchenne's myopathy. There has been a lot of work being done abroad, and actually I have been listening from the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons this session on gene therapy. For last almost 20 years I have been listening that this is one of the conditions where they are expecting to give something really positive to the patient. So we hope that gene therapy can probably make change. In these patients, you have to look for two more things. You have to look into the family history, whether the other children whom in the family are also having problem. And many a times, when they are very small, there is a difficulty explained by the parents that when they are lifting up the child is not able to hold the hands because of the weakness of the pectoral muscles. So that is sometimes earlier presentation before they get into this classical clamping on themselves sign, Gaur sign. So that is also one of the muscles that you should look for, whether they have weakness of the pectorals.
You're absolutely right. Genetic counseling is very important. Because we have seen some families where you find, sir, वो मेरा बच्चा जो है मेरा भाई मर गया, उसके बाद में मेरा पहले 2 बच्चा मर गया. I mean, like that. They will give you this kind of a history. So I think it's extremely important to have a genetic counseling in these families. With this, I think.
So we conclude this session, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I just want to make one more statement. I think we have already discussed about the equinus contracture in myopathy this time, but a very common presentation that would come to you is a post-polio residual paralysis. So just remember, like we are discussing about not correcting the equinus contracture in this case because of myopathy. Another case in which you have to be very careful about correcting it is post-polio when there is a quadriceps weakness. If there's a quadriceps weakness and the patient is compensating when and just walking on the toes, correcting the equinus would actually make his gait troublesome and he would end up having a hand-to-knee gait. So whenever you are examining an equinus contracture, it is very important you have to mention about the quadriceps power as well. And you have to examine it not just by doing a Gover sign, but generally examine the quadriceps power as well.